So like Father Whistler said to tell you this, if April showers bring Mayflowers, what do Mayflowers bring? Pilgrims, right. So he made me tell that, so I had to. And like all the other talks this on my years in the Chancery office, there's more that I can't say than I can in more ways than one. And also, I've mentioned before all the talks, I realize there's no one who knows me well about what I did in all these areas. And just a reminder to anybody, I know there's a couple of you here for the first time, I envisioned these as fireside chats, which means the nature of what I had to say would have been a little different. I have plenty to say, like the other talks that'll probably go about 45 minutes, and at the end, if anybody wants to give any rebuttal or ask anything or say anything, you're certainly welcome to do that. So we'll start, even though it's not a formal talk, it's musings, but we'll start with the Lord's Prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. So this chapter of my life you saw in the outlines from when I was age 40 to 52. So it stretches basically from 1990 to 2002. And I had mentioned for some of my previous assignments that I was a little bit surprised, and some of the places I was sent I had never heard of before, but this place I had heard of. It was a Catholic Education Office. It was at 4140 Lindell. In those days, the offices there were, church had several buildings on Lindell for going back to the beginning of the 20th century. So when people used to refer to the administration of the diocese, they just used to say on Lindell, just like right now they say at the Cardinal Regali Center. So I wasn't surprised, because that's what I was sent away to get my doctorate in, school administration. So it was pretty likely I was going to end up there someday. Now they call that the Office of Catholic Education and Formation. Back in my day, it was just called the school office. So when I got there, I realized that I fit the title of a bureaucrat. Which was not too exciting just when I thought about that word, but it's what I was. I still remember the first day I was the administrator of a school, because I had been involved in teaching for years. So being administrator of a school, I still remember the first day school began, and you hear the bell and everybody's going to a class, and I'm just sitting in my office. I'm thinking, now what am I supposed to do? Because I'm just sitting there, and everybody else is out teaching and learning. So I learned to adjust to there and learned what administrators do, and kind of a similar thing when I went to the superintendent's office. There's generally just a lot of energy and a lot of enthusiasm as a school year begins, even though there's a lot of chaos usually too. But in a bureaucracy, there isn't much energy or enthusiasm. You're just there doing what you do every day, and so it's a different kind of a feeling to get used to, because when I was school administrator, you're a little bit further away from the students than when you're a teacher, and you work in the superintendent's office, not only away from the kids, away from the teachers, worked mainly with other administrators and fundraisers and things like that. So the role of our office was to provide leadership, service, and advocacy for the schools. My particular role, that's why I gave it that subtitle, Connecting Church Bureaucracy to Souls. That always was my goal. Reminding anybody that reported to me or anybody I worked with that we were all about the kids, we were all about the mission of Catholic education, that it wasn't just about buildings and money and those kind of things. So it certainly had its business components, because we did manage the buildings, the money, the personnel, the policies. But and again, I took upon myself the role of making sure that everybody was reminded of what mission we were all about. I have to say, from the time I was a young man in my 20s and 30s, back in the 70s and 60s, when I was even younger, I hated the word bureaucracy. It was like I associated that with bad people, people who got in the way of people who wanted to do good things. And now I was one. And so, and I even remember one of the priests who was one of my heroes. He was a parish priest. He was a man after my own heart. He always had multiple jobs. His name was Ed O'Donnell. He was a priest about 20 years older than me. He was a priest that I confided in. He eventually became an auxiliary bishop. He was the editor of the St. Louis Review paper. He almost always was a pastor, the same time as he held jobs with the Archbishop. So my life ended up following that same pattern. He even did one additional thing. Wherever he was pastor, he always coached a soccer team. He loved soccer himself, and so I try to imitate him in being a bureaucrat and also being able to serve people well, still at a one-on-one level. It hurt me one day when I heard him introduce himself and he called himself a bureaucrat. I thought, don't say that about yourself. You're such a good priest. But I understood what he meant. He was doing his best to serve the church, and he was a very good administrator also. I have to say, in my younger day, in that position, I was pretty tough on people who were veterans, even though I was only in my 40s. I had to challenge people who were in their 50s and 60s and even 70s. And that wasn't always easy, and it certainly wasn't popular. Didn't make me popular with a lot of people who wanted me to just back whatever anybody else was already doing, but that wasn't my MO. My goal. Seems to be working, okay. I guess it just likes to go off every now and again. So, what? Yeah, start over. Yeah, right. So, but anyway, what I took from that is this: just even listening to him calling himself a bureaucrat, was it's possible to maintain your humanity and the personal touch. And so I didn't mind being unpopular, even taking on veteran people and who were part of our school community, if it was for the good of the kids. And I learned about the teachers. We always wish we could pay the teachers more. I learned to work with the teachers and help determine supporting them as best as we could. I learned that their priorities, one was job security, number 2 is benefits, and number 3 was salaries. Anybody who goes to work in a Catholic school understands they're not going to be making a ton of money, but they certainly prized the security and the benefits if the salary couldn't be there. We had the same challenge that exists in Catholic schools today existed 35 years ago. We want to pay the teachers more. Every time our main source of money was tuition. Every time you raise tuition, you lose kids, so then you lose more teachers. So it kind of becomes a downward spiral, and that's the same thing that's been a challenge for us for all these years. We had those challenges going back all those years, and combined with that was the era in which more and more religious were leaving the schools. I think I mentioned in last week's talk when I was at St. Dominic in the 70s, there were still 11 nuns teaching there. 10 years later, there were like 3, and they got down to 0 pretty quick. And or maybe 1 left in administration or something. Rosary, where I was, had 25 nuns there back in the early part of the 70s. And by the time I got there in the 80s, they were down to 5. And then not too many years later, they were down to 1. It's just the way things were going, which made the challenge of finding more lay teachers. It was an ongoing challenge for us. I want to point out some key years here. At my age, one thing I'm good for is history. The peak year for births in the United States is 1957. That was during the middle now of what we call the baby boom, 1946 to 1964. That was when the most babies, there's more people that age than any other age in the United States, whatever that turns out to be, 68 or 69. And so the reason it started going down after that is because that's when the pill came out, 1957. And so the birth rate kept going down until 1974, and that's when it was discovered that there was a correlation between the contraceptive pills and breast cancer, and so that scared a lot of people, and so the birth rate started going up temporarily in the 70s. And so the peak year for Catholic school enrollment was 1977, so that's almost 50 years ago. It's been going down since. Not dramatically, but steadily. Some years, some decades more than others, but in a general sense, steadily down since then. The only reason we have as many kids in Catholic schools as we used to is because we have more non-Catholic kids in the schools. But anyway, that's been part of the ongoing challenge. I'm just giving these numbers tonight because those of you who are familiar with what's going on now, the issues we're dealing with didn't just start this year or last year or even 10 or 20 years ago, but they go back 30, 40, 50 years ago. You could see the handwriting on the wall. And so I entered that office in 1990, and these were the trends at the time. And the time I left in 1997, the trends were the same. One thing that I got involved in during those years, again because of the trend of fewer kids and fewer kids able to afford the schools, marketing became a big thing, and we were very blessed in our diocese. A lot of the people who worked with some of the key marketing companies in town were Catholic guys. One of them, at that time, AB's marketing firm was called Fleischman Hilliard. It doesn't exist anymore in St. Louis. They went with a company in Chicago, but one of the guys from that company came in and helped us. Another one, he was the second biggest marketing company in town, was called Glenn & Companies, and the man's name who ran that was Glenn Chamberetz, and Glenn's still alive, and he volunteered a lot of his time, and people who were higher up in these companies, like Glenn owned his own company, they would get some of their young trainees to help us, so that was a big thing. And another man who had AB connections in their marketing was, actually worked for AB, was Tom Gottlieb. He's a deacon in our diocese now, and Tom was a big help also, and used his expertise to help us. And when we started all those marketing things back in the 90s, so this goes back 30 years ago, some people were upset about it. They associated marketing with watering down your mission, which is true, and sometimes to some people's minds, marketing means just altering your product to please the client. Like that's how all these select beers got so popular. AB just they'd throw 12 new ones against the wall every year and see what stuck. Well, they didn't want the same thing to happen in the Catholic schools. You need to keep them about what they were. So my leadership position always was, our goal should not be just to survive, but to thrive. And so that worked pretty good, because my idea was anybody whose goal is just to survive won't. If your goal is to thrive, you have a better chance of surviving anyway. And that was true not just because I was in the office. That became the way people approach things. And so at the end of my 7 years there, we had as many high schools as when I started. And another thing I learned during those years to try to promote different initiatives was get people on your side before you announce a decision, rather than announce your decision and then try to talk people into it. That seemed to work out pretty well. A lesson I learned about working with staff was pick them wisely, back them, and thank them. You can't back them and thank them enough. No matter how much you thank them, it's never enough. This is a common thing for anybody who's in administration, but I got a lot of practice at praising in public and criticizing in private. Anybody who worked with me at the time knew that I was not afraid to call people into my office and give them some feedback. But I was never going to, nobody never criticized anybody in public, and I still don't to this day. It's really not a good way to approach things. Some of the things I'm proud of during those years, one of them was the origins of Cardinal Brother College Prep were during those years. That could be a whole talk in and of itself. It's become very successful in the Archdiocese. It was pretty clear it needed to move out of Walnut Park. It wasn't going to survive there when Walnut Park became drug infested. And then another initiative we took was the bishop during that time was Archbishop John L. May. He was from Chicago, but he had moved to Mobile before he came here. He was a wonderful, wonderful man. He had piercing eyes, almost scared you. He was one of those people that when he looked at you, you thought he was looking right into your soul, and you hoped he wasn't seeing too much. He was a wonderful man, a great humility. He was diagnosed with cancer in the summer of 1992, and it was a very serious brain tumor, and he was only given about 6 months, but he lived about another year and a half, almost 2 years. And so we started an award named after him shortly after he passed, called the Archbishop John L. May Service Awards. It's given out to one kid from each high school every year. The idea behind that was the kids in most schools who get the most attention are either the smartest kids or the best athletes. So the idea there was, why shouldn't we have some big public award for the kid who's best at actually living out the mission of service to the community? And so we named that after him. And my talk's long enough already, but I should, just seeing some of the people that are sitting here, one story I should tell, another thing I'm proud of that happened during those years. When I was younger and first started teaching, it used to be that if a high school girl got pregnant in school, she was kicked out of school. And I had been around enough kids to know that I thought that was really a dumb idea, because what about all the girls already in that school who got pregnant? If they got pregnant then and were afraid of getting kicked out of school, they'd just go. Even in those years, in the 90s, there wasn't much of a pro-life movement yet after Roe v. Wade. And so how many girls from each school were getting abortions every year? And so it was not everybody. I wasn't popular with a lot of people. Some people would brag about their school that, well, no girls ever showed up pregnant in their school, and I thought those people had their heads in the sands. They didn't have 0 pregnancies appear, not because their kids didn't do the things that teenagers usually do, but because they were taking care of it in a way which was not in line with what our church teaches. So one of the many ways I made myself unpopular in every position I've had was, but we got that changed, and so to this day, actually I would say right now, I'd say it's a problem in our Catholic high schools that no girl hardly ever appears, shows up pregnant, and for obvious reasons. So it's anyway, the policy at least allows them to stay in school now and finish. In fact, one year, one of the kids who was nominated for this Archbishop John L. May Service Award became pregnant after she was nominated before the ceremony, and we obviously kept her in the ceremony and gave her the award, and she at least kept the baby, which a lot of people don't do. Okay, next, after that, I did that for 7 years, and then the next office I went to was the planning office, and I see a man here tonight, John Schwob, who's become a good friend. John worked for the phone company, and let's just say that John used what he learned at the phone company about demographics to help the diocese. I'll just leave it at that. There's a lot more details, but the fact that right now we have, and John eventually became an employee of the Archdiocese. He practically was. He was just volunteering, working with me. But I traded in the demographers that we were using at St. Luke's University for John, and I'm very, very glad that I did. He was a huge help. So so now for about the last close to 30 years, at least 20 years, we've had parish boundaries mapped to the census tracts, and it's a huge help in planning so that we know exactly what we're dealing with. So that office was, again, it can sound pretty dry and pretty vague, being in a planning office. That sounds like, what good is that? How are you really helping anybody? Well, the answer to that, how are you helping somebody, is from the bishop's perspective, can make a lot better decisions about the use of personnel and money and buildings if you actually know what you're talking about. Is what many of you know. One of my favorite philosophers is Mark Twain, and he simply said, "There's nothing like knowing." And so it's like that. Does having planning and good stats make decisions for you? No, but you make more well-informed decisions. And John was a huge help to me, and I enjoyed those years. And also, I learned, most of you also know me. You know, I'm a big planning guy, so you can't really develop a plan unless you have two things. You have to have the data, you have to have a vision, and I learned during those years, a lot of people have an idea about what planning means. Let's get everybody together and throw a bunch of ideas in the pot and see whose ideas wins. That kind of planning never works. The head person needs to have a vision top down, and by the time I got that position, we had a new archbishop. There was a new sheriff in town, and that was Cardinal Regali, and he definitely had a vision, and he was never afraid to say it, and he put it in writing, and so he guided everything that we did. Also, my favorite scripture with regard to planning was then and remains Psalm 127, "Unless the Lord build the house, they labor in vain who build it." So that's the whole point, is of any of us who are involved in church work, to make sure it's kind of consistent with what I said before about mission. What good does it do to be very clever about money and buildings and personnel and programs unless you think you're doing it the Lord's way? I worked very closely with Cardinal Regali in those years before he was a cardinal, but a lot of people did not like working with him because he was so big on details, and he couldn't out-detail me. So it was a good match, and he knew what going into any meeting, he was the best informed person at the meeting. You didn't want to get into a debate with him shooting from the hip because you were going to lose. And it taught me to do the same thing. If you're going to have a position on something, go in with your facts in hand. He also taught me about kindness in treating people. He worked in Rome for 30 years, pretty much the first 30 years of his priesthood. He was pretty unfamiliar with, about all he knew about the American church was what he read in reports that got sent to Rome, a lot of them which were probably complaints. So he was always wary of just about everything, which didn't hurt us. He was always thinking about all the things we could be doing wrong. And yet I was blessed to be there at a time where there were some very gifted people on his staff, and I think we worked well as a team. Now, most of you, if you know something about Rome, you know one of the Romans are especially good at diplomacy and politics, and so they're schooled in that. And he worked in a diplomatic office there. He was a good example to me about being a diplomat. Italians have a term called bella figura. It means saving face for other people. He made sure that no one ever got insulted in public. One particular thing that I remember, one particular story about that, this isn't a big deal, but it was an example of the way that he was. I used to organize a lot of meetings for him because I was one of his staff people, and it was up to me to make sure the right people got at these meetings. And he always wanted to know who was going to be there and how they were going to help and what was going to be their role. And this one meeting that we had worked pretty hard on, I forget what the topic was, but it was a pretty big deal. Decision was going to be made, and somebody came walking into the room that I knew that he didn't like and had no use for that person's opinion. And yet when the person walked in, He didn't say a word. He invited him to come in and sit down and be part of the meeting, and participated. No confrontation, but it was my job when the meeting was over to make sure that that never happened again. But he was very good at being consistent and treating people fairly and with kindness. I would say just as I gave the subtitle of this talk, connecting church bureaucracy to souls, I think he was very good at that. He always kept the souls in mind first. I ended up with the other responsibilities during that same time. I became the vicar for education, the vicar for evangelization. That means that you represent the archbishop to the community in those areas. I got to learn about when there were some attempts from the teachers to organize a union. The carpenters wanted to organize the teachers into a trade union, and so I had a chance to learn about how union bosses operate. I never heard anybody talk to an archbishop the way that union boss did, sitting in front of the archbishop, pounding on the table. So since the buck didn't really stop with me in that, I was an intermediary, but it was interesting for me to see the way that the world works, and it was my job to try to make sure those things came to a good conclusion, or as good as we could. And yeah, and one of my approaches to my own life, to the life, any administrative job I've had, always has been, it's important to go into each day, each month, each year with a plan, and it's important to be willing to change it. So that's been my general approach, to be flexible. I think I used to teach this to the seminarians. I think a lot of the seminarians and even the young priests are very good about being flexible, making it up as they go along, not necessarily good about having a plan in the first place. So I tried teaching them that both parts were important. It's easy enough to be flexible if you don't have a goal in the first place. And so that was my role, was to try to help set that for the diocese. It'd be inappropriate for me to talk about those years from 1990 to 2002, because I had the planning position from 1997 to 2002 when I went to the seminary, without talking about the visit of Pope St. John Paul II. I still remember the day that Archbishop Regali, Cardinal Regali, told us that the Pope was going to come to St. Louis. And I still remember exactly where I was. I was doing one of my 3 jobs I had at the time, and he called all the staff together. It's that round building on Lindo, most people just called it the Round House. That's where all of our offices were in those days. And we were all gathered around this circle, and he announced to us that the Pope was coming. This is in April of 1998. And then I was not quite as excited as everybody else. I had met the Pope before, and so I thought, well, that'll be nice, but little did I realize how nice it would be. And then later on in the day, I learned that I was one of 4 priests who was going to organize that. I was also less than excited about that, because my first thought was, well, when am I going to do this? I was pastor of the parish, I was a vicar for planning, vicar for evangelization, vicar for education, and I was teaching graduate classes at St. Louis University. So I thought, well, that was nice of him to invite me to do that, but I did do it, and he was a very hard worker himself, and he wasn't afraid. And if ever anybody of his staff members mentioned to him about having too much to do, he did have a phrase which I've quoted a lot since then. In fact, Mary Lou's here, I tell it to her all the time: do the possible. Do the possible is a double-edged sword. It means do at least the possible, but it means there's a limit to what you can do. But for him, that limit was pretty high, which was fine with me. So it ended up being one of the greatest honors of my life to work on that. It ended up being the closest I ever came to having a baby, because it was a 9-month process. We started in April, and he came in January. And it felt like that. The last month felt like labor. The work didn't stop, but it ended up being one of the prouder days for the St. Louis community. It's one of the few times in history that I know of where the for-profit community, the not-for-profit community, and the political community was all on the same page. There was no crime in St. Louis for the 36 hours that he was here. We worked very closely with the Secret Service. I never knew anything about the Secret Service. Secret Service sat in on every meeting we had, every meeting. The four of us met very often. The last couple of months we met every day. The last month we met several times a day. Secret Service was there for every one of them. And we got to be pretty good friends of theirs. We argued with them a lot because our job was to get people to see the Pope. Their job, what we told them, was to get people not to see the Pope. And so that was, but they called him their protectee, which I learned to love the fact that they were here. And you don't need to hear about how all that was organized, but there was a lot to it. The two biggest impacts from a planning perspective were the media and security. The media and security were involved in everything that we did. And I'm happy with the fact that there was I don't know if anybody here ever heard the name Steve Shankman. Okay, Steve Shankman was the one who owned a company that started Riverport. They're the biggest event organizers in town, still are. Steve's actually, in his heart, he's a trumpet player, and he still plays gigs as a trumpet player. Steve's Jewish, but we hired Contemporary Productions, was the name of their company, to help us organize this. And I still run into him from time to time at various venues when he's just playing a gig. But I've heard him interviewed before, and not when he knew I was listening, but he could be interviewed on any random. If there's somebody big deal person coming to town, he oftentimes still gets interviewed. They asked him one time, because he's any nationally known entertainer you can think of that's been to St. Louis, they probably organized it. They asked him what was the biggest gig he ever worked on. He said the Pope. So, and it was a big deal, and even Steve recognized that. And it just go out. No, sounds like it goes out every now and again. Maybe that's a sign to me. Well, but at any rate, out of that event, besides all the spiritual benefits that came from it, actually one of the Secret Service agents became a convert, and he was the one. There was an agent assigned to each venue. We had the agent that was assigned to the Archbishop's house, which is where the Pope stayed while he was in town. So yeah, we got to be close with all of them. It actually was, and there were meeting after meeting after meeting. And so one day I was sitting at some random meeting, and I usually was sitting in the front row, and it was the FBI guys were talking, I can't say I was dozing off exactly, but I was listening to this guy and basically thinking yada, yada, yada. But what got my attention was he said, well, our role ultimately in this event is to protect you from weapons of mass destruction. It's the first time I heard that term, and that got my attention. I sat up straight. It was actually not the first time, it was the first time publicly in person I heard the name Saddam Hussein mentioned. And if you think about it, the Pope came in January 1999, so 9/11 was less than 2 years later. And so they were onto something. They told us endless stories about how it helped me learn a lot about what the security is supposed to do. They would tell us stories about, they kept track of a lot of bad guys. And when somebody big was coming to town, they would take sometimes some of the bad guys on little field trips out of town and let them out somewhere else and let them find their own way back. So we would hear those kind of stories. You know, they seal off every sewer lid. And anyway, that was a big part of the deal. And it was a great event. And the spirituality that came from it from so many people. To this day, I mean, I know I was the one who organized all those different, we had 70 committees going on, and I knew it was my job to appoint those people and make it all work. And to this day, it's amusing, but also makes me feel good. There's people who will tell me they don't remember who I was from that event or whatever, or never knew, because I didn't get to know everybody personally. We had thousands of volunteers. They would come up and tell me what a big deal role they had in the event, and I'll know what they did. And so I never really say anything, but I think it's good that many people feel like that they were an important part of the event. That's what it was all about, was to get that kind of ownership. And I can't talk about this section of my life. During this same time, I was also pastor at St. Stanislaus Church, St. Stanislaus Kostka, which most of you, it's been in the news a lot, not much anymore, but it was. It was where I had my roots. It was one of 5 Polish parishes in St. Louis. Both sets of my grandparents who were married there. My parents were married there. I was baptized there. I was pastor there during these 12 years, from 1990 to 2002. So I felt like I learned a lot about my own heritage there. They were a common denominator, I would say, of a lot of Polish people, and the heritage is Polish people, like Jewish people, or to some degree like African Americans. Culturally, their roots are being oppressed people. And when your roots are oppressed people, people tend to be insecure and defensive. And so that came out in the people, in the different groups of immigrants that came. There's nothing pretty about immigration. No one leaves where they are and goes somewhere else because things are so good at home. So everybody had their own story as to how they got here. I learned to not believe anybody's story. People had to come up with a reason that they're here that made them comfortable emotionally. But I listened a lot and tried to learn. But yeah, there were basically 3 generations of immigrants there. The one was the generation of my grandparents, which came in right after World War I. And then the second generation, there had been a generation before that in the 19th century, but in the 20th century there were 3 generations of immigrants. That one that came in right after World War I to escape communism, the one that came in right after World War II. We had a nickname for those people. It sounds bad, but it wasn't pejorative. We called them DPs, displaced people. Those are the people who were from Poland but fled, because Poland's history is having a lot of uninvited guests. From Germany in 1939, and then from Russia in 1946. Those uninvited guests stayed there till 1989 when the Berlin Wall fell. And so so the 3rd generation was those who came in when the Solidarity Trade Union was started in the 1980s. And so those 3 groups did not necessarily get along with one another. That would be an understatement. But there were many divisions and a lot of insecure people, a lot of people with low self-esteem, proud of their heritage generally, but didn't get along very well. And that was one of my jobs, to try to help them get along. The Polish word for unity is jedność. And one of the great, we have a Polish speaker here tonight too. That's good, Claudia. So she knows, I don't know if I ever told her this story, but that was my goal. The goal as a pastor is to unite the people. And so I thought one thing that would do it, they all love Sister Faustina Kowalska, the one who's connected with the Divine Mercy devotion. That's a huge picture we have here of Divine Mercy. And I thought one thing that would be nice would be, just like they do in some churches, you have a traveling statue or something, we would have a traveling image of Divine Mercy. You come up to the altar, give it to them on Sunday, bless them, take it home with them for a week, bring it back the next week. Well, that was my goal, was to unite the people around the devotion. I said, if you unite your heart with the heart of Jesus, you'll be united to one another. That was my wish. Didn't really hardly ever happen, but the extreme of that was one time we were going to give that image to the next family, and they wouldn't take it because it had been in this family's home. So that was the extent to which low self-esteem goes to do self-harm is endless. And so, I mean, for me it was a challenge, but I had a great life apart from that, and yet it was my heritage. I have to own it. And so it was, I learned a lot about those of you who think I might be strong-minded about certain things, well, I did not, came by it naturally. And that's why I put another subtitle for this talk. I called it Bloom Where You're Planted. Well, I was planted in a lot of different places in those years. In the education office and the planning office at St. Stanislaus. And during all this time, I was teaching in graduate school at St. Louis University. I taught probably at one point almost half the school principals in the diocese. At my age now, almost everybody I taught's retired. In fact, I think people who keep track of that told me the last one I taught who got their master's degree under me retired last year. So that's kind of the chapter of life that I'm in. But I enjoyed it. I was proud of that. That I was able to have the opportunity to teach all those people who were school leaders, and I try to teach them the same lessons I had learned about leadership, and particularly about keeping everything mission-centered. That something must be wrong with this wiring. Seems to work off and on. But anyway, particularly that idea of making everything mission-oriented, that the purpose of a school is not to give people jobs. The purpose of the school is to promote the gospel. And that's the goal always, is to keep all the decisions child-centered. It can be too easy for a leader to just get too concerned about money or buildings, that kind of thing, and our reputation for that matter. But it's the idea to keep it focused on the mission of the gospel, which is to train the young people to become good Catholics. Some of the lessons that I've shared some of the lessons along the way, but this means I'm in the final part of my talk, so can relax a little bit. But one of the things I learned partially from Cardinal Regali, but it just in all, I had to make a lot of very difficult decisions involving money, who was going to get it, who wasn't, involving personnel, involving institutions, but kind of in his style, let mercy triumph over judgment. It doesn't mean that you don't stand up to what's wrong, but it means keep mercy in the forefront. Remember, everybody, I try to always remind myself with whatever level of responsibility I had, everybody I was dealing with was a human being. Everybody had their own hurts, their own pains, their own sufferings, their own insecurities, and so I should keep that in mind when I'm making decisions. Also, another thing, this was just my style. No one I ever worked with in any of those positions is in my inner circle of friends. I thought that was a bad way to go. I would say I made some friends out of that, or people who became friends later on after I left those positions, but I just didn't do that. I was pretty convinced that a lot of bad decisions were made in the diocese when it was too ingrown. When people appointed other people to positions who were close friends, you became beholden to them, and frankly, I had plenty of friends outside of the people I worked with. I didn't go there looking for more friends. I tried to always be kind and merciful, but I found my friends other places. Those boundaries, because I had to make a lot of decisions that involved, again, people, money, buildings, programs, and I wanted to keep my care about it, but keep my personal feelings about the people involved out of it. Yeah, and actually, so I said I keep in great touch with a lot of extended family members. My parents were still alive during all these years. I was blessed to have them into old age. I kept in especially close touch with people in Washington, Missouri, which is the last place I had served before I moved back into the city. And then actually some of the people are here tonight. There are some couples here tonight I'm very close friends with. I've mentioned those of you who are parishioners here, heard me mention my young couples faith-sharing group. Well, that's some of them here tonight. So we also didn't set out to be close friends. We set out just to get together to support each other in faith. But over the last 35 years, we've become very close friends. So that's actually, we got this group started during those years. And that was part of they're forever thanking me for being with them, but I tell them they were a benefit for me. They helped me be a better priest, and they became the people that I could talk to. And in fact, leading up to the next talk, when I would get moved from one assignment to another, sometimes I would tell them about my feelings, which were not always excitement about going to the next place, but they would always offer me some encouragement. And in priestly fraternity, I have involved in multiple circles of priest friend groups. And then a lesson I learned during that time, when I'm still a relatively healthy 75-year-old, but I still remember for some year, age 43 stands out. When I was 43, almost everything in my body got worse, from my head to my toes. Nothing life-threatening, but nothing was the same as it was when I was 23 or 33. Everything just needed an oil change or a slight tune-up of some kind. And so I learned I had to try to always be this way, but the first time in life I had to be intentional about it. I learned take care of 4 basic things, and that's carried me through all these years. Take care of your body, your mind, your soul, and your key relationships. And I use those 4 things when I counsel. Even in my own day, almost all my days go pretty good. I'm not sure how they go for people that I'm around, but for me, they go good. And so, but if something's not, I feel like things not going well, I usually run through in my own mind, it's usually something's wrong with one of those 4 things. My body, my mind, my soul, some key relationship. And if I tend to those 4 things, then whatever else I'm dealing with seems to be okay. And put it in perspective. And so, and then the final lesson I put down is, it's an old saying that gets used a lot for those of us who serve in the church. You can work really hard, be very dedicated, try your best to achieve human goals and for the good of the church and to keep faithful to the mission. But in the end, we say it's God's church. It's not my church. So that kind of goes along with do the possible. It's not my job to make the church turn out a certain way. I can't make anything turn out a certain way. I can just do what I can do, and we say the growth comes from God. So thank you for being here tonight, and nobody walked out, so thank you again. Does anybody John, you want to say anything? I figured you might.
So I showed up tonight. I'm John Schwab. I first met
John, this works if you want to use it. You can hear it? Okay.
I first met Monsignor Ted when he was in the school office. I was on the Archdiocesan Board of Education, and it was a very interesting time when the Catholic school teachers were trying to organize, and it was just an interesting process as being on the Board of Education. But Father Ted remembered me, and when Archbishop Regali came and started the strategic plan for the diocese, he probably figured that if Father Ted asked me to participate with him, maybe I'd help him, maybe I wouldn't. So he puts the bug in Archbishop Regali's ear, and Archbishop Regali calls me at my home and says, would you participate with Father Ted in the strategic plan? So I guess I couldn't turn that down. But I do have one memory. You may not remember this, but he was talking about, closer? Okay, sorry. He was talking about, we first got involved in doing demographic analysis and mapping all the parish boundaries of the diocese. Well, he came over to my house and we sat in the den on my computer screen, and I pulled up the GIS software we were using. We sat there, each of us with a glass of wine, and I taught him about how to do mapping, and that was just really an interesting time. But anyway, I stuck around, volunteered for Father Ted, and then his successor, Monsignor Delaney, and his successor in the planning office, who was Deacon Dan Henroyd. And when Deacon Dan Henroyd retired, they offered me to pay me for what I used to do as a volunteer for free. What a sweet little deal that was. But honestly, these last 14 years working for the diocese has just been the most rewarding thing that I think I have ever done in my professional career, and I really owe it all to you, Msgr Ted.
Well, thank you. Any of you young people want to say anything over there? Okay. They're not young anymore. All right. So thank you for coming, and I'll be in the back if you want to visit for a little bit. So you get to hear me talk about jedność.